So good evening everyone, and may I extend a very warm welcome to our inaugural Courageous Conversations. My name is Louisa Sondergeld, and thank you for joining us this evening to discuss youth mental health, a topic which came from inside our parish. Our aim in creating Courageous Conversations is to allow respectful discussion of challenging topics and to learn more and realise the wonderful ways in which we might impact our community. In the spirit of reconciliation, we recognise the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. Tonight we meet on the land of the Turrbal and Yagara people. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. It has been described that we are in a mental health crisis. It is no surprise in a world that faces war, terrorism, pandemics, loneliness and disconnection. It is often our younger citizens who feel the burden of this. The Black Dog Institute reports that 3/4 of common mental health conditions emerge before the age of 25. More than 40% of Year 12 students report symptoms of anxiety and depression. Suicide is a leading cause of death for people aged 5 to 17 years old. And yet a lack of publicly funded resources and significant wait times renders services difficult to access. How do we navigate this system, and how can we learn together to support our youth? Tonight we have invited a speaker I feel very privileged to be sharing the floor with. May I introduce Lachlan Avent. He is a registered psychologist at Goals Fortitude Valley. He graduated with a Bachelor of Psychological Science with honours from the University of Queensland. He works with clients of all ages, but has a special interest in working with children, particularly those with autism and ADHD. He has completed further training to be able to administer assessments for suspected autism and ADHD. He also enjoys assisting with a range of mental health conditions, including depression, anxiety, learning disorders and intellectual disability, having completed training in cognitive behavioural therapy, dialectical behavioural therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, motivational interviewing and emotion-focused therapy. He also provides parenting support and has completed the PPP Stepping Stones parenting program. He is passionate about providing a safe space for clients to express themselves, achieve their potential and meet the challenges that life presents. Please join me in welcoming Lachlan.
Hello.
Please be aware that tonight we are discussing an emotionally difficult topic. Should you feel the need to take a moment and leave the room, we invite you to do so. There's a room set up behind with some water, chairs and support resources. Should anyone need support, Anne is happy to be available after this discussion. We understand that your questions may come from personal experience. We're not in an appropriate setting to provide medical care, and tonight's topic does not constitute medical advice. Any further questions you should discuss with your own health professional. Finally, I'm aware that we may have a diversity of views. We have come tonight ready to learn from one another. While our opinions may differ, I ask that we share our views with an attitude of respect and tolerance. So I first wanted to begin by asking Lachlan a few questions, and then when we're ready, we'll get Anne to help out with asking some questions from the floor. So Lachlan, I wanted you to have the opportunity to share your journey and what led you to becoming a psychologist.
I began my journey actually not in psychology. I began studying a Bachelor of Exercise and Sports Science at university. For some unknown reason, I just ended up in that degree. As you are when you're 17, you don't know where you're going. And so I did that for 1 year, and in the course I took a program that was a psychology course, and I really enjoyed that. And so that led me to change my degree into a Bachelor of Psychology, and then pursue it from there. So that's how I got my journey started in psychology. And then I remember when I was working in the degree, when I was studying in the degree, I used to say, I will never work with children. You cannot pay me enough to work with children. I want to work only with adults and, severe mental health concerns for adults. And then From there, I started working in disability support after I graduated from university, and I was looking for a job as a psychologist, and I was having a lot of trouble actually finding the appropriate job to work in and complete my registration program. And then along came a job that was everything I was looking for. It was fully supervised and training provided and everything I needed, and the catch was it was for children. So naturally I said, sure, I'll go for it. And I went into that job and completed my training there. And believe it or not, it's actually probably the best job I've ever had, working with children. And it's been the most fulfilling job I've ever had as well. So that's how I came to work as a psychologist and how I came to work with children every day.
I think that's a wonderful thing to show for our teenagers in the audience, that sometimes what you think you might do immediately after school is a little bit different to what works out in the end, and that you can easily change where you start in your university journey. Tell me what a typical day looks like for you.
In a typical day, I work in a private practice in the Valley, and I will see probably between 5 and 6 people a day, sometimes 7 if we're really busy. And they'll be from the age of probably 6 up to, I think the oldest person I've sort of seen lately is about 50. And I'll provide therapy, or I'll do an assessment in the practice. And so it'll be from a range of different presentations: anxiety, depression. Some people come in with a child who is having differences at school with learning, or behavioural challenges, or social difficulties at school. And so we gather a bit of information, and then we make a bit of a plan, and we begin our intervention to help create a life for someone who can thrive.
How does psychology differ for a child versus an adult?
Psychology for children is very different. Like I am with you right now, I would just have a conversation with an adult. With a child, it's a lot more challenging because you need to break things down to smaller steps. A child can't always understand that they feel anxious about something and recognize that, so you've got to break it down even further. It might be, in a day, I might teach a child just how to recognize an emotion and start from there. And then I might create visual tools with them to help them understand a little bit better before I go into how to manage these conditions that they have. And so it's just a lot more simplified when you work with children. It's a lot slower moving as well. In a session with an adult, I can probably make a lot of change in that one session and sometimes never see them again, and they'll be okay. But for children, I do have to break it down and just take it slower for them to help understand.
And what are the typical mental health conditions that you deal with, and what are some examples of the therapies that you provide?
So the majority of the people I work with have a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, some have an intellectual disability, some also have learning difficulties like dyslexia. And so from there, I often treat them for other coexisting conditions like anxiety and depression, stress and social differences. I'll use a range of different therapies. I'll do cognitive behavioural therapy with a lot of them, which is the process of helping them identify what they're thinking, how this is influencing how they feel, and how this is influencing what they do in their daily life. Other therapies I might use would be acceptance and commitment therapy, which is where I find I do this a lot more with teens and adults, where we help them identify the values and the guiding lights in their life, whatever informs their life and what they want to run towards, and I help them identify what's important, what things am I doing that aren't working for me right now and are actually taking me away from the life I want to live, and I help them create a life that they do want to live in respect to their values and things that are important to them. Other therapies I might use would be dialectical behavioural therapy, which is a very good treatment for really intense emotions. A lot of teens benefit from this one because teens struggle with some pretty big emotions sometimes, and so I'll just teach them the process of emotional regulation skills for very intense experiences for them, and help them find adaptive ways to manage their daily life.
Could you give an example of a time that you've used one of these therapies and how you were able to use it, maybe in an example of someone with anxiety or phobias?
That's a great example. Cognitive behavioural therapy is a great treatment for anxiety. I recently had a client who was experiencing a very specific phobia of using lifts, and him and his family were going away on a holiday. And I think he must have watched a television show where they got stuck in a lift, and all of a sudden he was like, I can't get in a lift, it's gonna get stuck, and won't know what to do, and the worst will happen. And so he started avoiding lifts everywhere they went. At the shopping centre, he would take the escalator or the stairs, or he just wouldn't get in at all, and he'd meet his parents up on the next level, and practicing a lot of avoidance. And so this child, they came to me and they said, we've got 6 weeks before we go away on a holiday, and we're staying in a hotel where there's only an elevator to get up to the hotel room. So they were like, we need to work on this, because we can't go on a holiday and leave him in the lobby. It just won't work. So we, like I said before, children need a lot more simpler ways to understand these conditions. So we started off by teaching this child what anxiety is. What am I feeling? What am I thinking? And then we helped this child build skills around regulating that anxiety. After we did that, we practiced. I set the assignment between sessions of going out and trying skills, but in a very managed way. So if someone's really anxious, you can't just tell them to do something that they're scared of start to finish. Often you've got to start small, make it manageable, make it something they can achieve on the first go, so that they can test their theories that their mind has created about this phobia. So for this child, that was getting the child to just even stand near a lift for a little bit and see how they feel. And then after that, they did that a few times, and they just kept doing this. Sounds silly, but it's repetitive, and it actually teaches this child that the worst isn't going to happen. And so we broke it down to a few different steps. The next step was getting into the lift and then going back out, seeing if it actually caved in or if it got stuck just by walking in. Again, we're testing his thoughts about what was going to happen. And by doing so, this child slowly built up the evidence in their own mind that, the worst isn't actually going to happen. And so it was probably, I think, 4 or 5 weeks, and then each time I saw them, they were getting better and better and better, practicing and testing out their beliefs that the worst would happen and seeing that it actually didn't, and using the skills that we learnt in our sessions as well. And eventually he was fine, and he was actually looking forward to it. And then I saw them again after the holiday just for another check-in, and they said that he had the best time ever because the hotel had a big glass lift they could watch. So he would have missed out on that if he hadn't gone on the holiday.
And when you have teenage and children clients coming in to see you, how do you connect with them and make them feel comfortable in the environment in your office?
Teens are challenging. I think all parents can attest to that teens don't often want to speak to someone. So it takes a little bit of trust building, rapport building in the initial stages, whether that's just me getting to know them. With teens, I often will have to say to the parents, let's do a quick chat at the start, but then I'm probably going to spend a lot more time with the teen, just us, because they don't want to share things in front of their parents. And that's very common, actually. A lot of teens don't want to talk about some of the things they're going through with their parents. It's just, they just don't want to. Everyone can sort of recall that experience when they were a teenager. The last person you want to talk about, whether it's dating, anxiety, or anything, you don't want to talk to your parents about that often. So, yes. And then children are a different ballpark. You've got to have more fun with them. Sometimes that might just mean playing a couple of games with a child just to make them feel comfortable before we work on what's actually the presenting concern. So very different to adults as well. Adults, you can just talk to them usually and build a bit of rapport quite quickly.
What do you do when you have parents coming in who either are looking for certain diagnoses or don't believe in psychology or don't believe in a diagnosis that their child might have been given?
I think that's an interesting one, because a lot of the mental health resources and information we have grown since the 60s and the 70s. We now have more information. We now have more resources. We now have more tools to identify these things. And parents who've grown up in a different generation, they just don't get it. And that's just how they learned about mental health when they were younger. But now we do have the things to actually help people understand a little bit better. We have more research that shows these things exist in daily life. And we have a lot more ways to support them. So education, I think. Yeah.
And if there's a custody dispute between parents, how do you navigate that when one is seeking psychology and the other doesn't give their consent?
Custody disputes are notoriously challenging for psychologists. As soon as we get a split family, we go, oh, okay, is there a court order in place? So when there is this sort of case, a psychologist needs to have consent from both parents in a split custody arrangement. And this can be challenging when we have two parents with differing views on mental health and psychology intervention. If one parent really wants to work on something and help their child, and another parent says this doesn't exist, or I don't want to do this, I'm usually stuck in a bit of a predicament where I want to help, but I can't always help in terms of the ethical guidelines. So what I can do to get around that is I can work with a parent and provide parenting support to help understand their child and provide them with some of the resources if I'm not allowed to work directly with a child.
When it comes to mental health condition, what are some of the factors that might precipitate the conditions or exacerbate their presentation?
I think a big one is a lot of bullying at school can precipitate mental health concerns. A lot of people have underlying anxiety and learning differences, but then bullying can be a really big precipitating factor for this at school. Sometimes stress of school exams can precipitate more anxiety and depression for a youth. Lots of those things at school can precipitate challenges for them. So that's when they usually come to me and need to have someone to talk to about it.
What about any genetic predispositions for mental health conditions?
There is an element of genetic components in mental health. I think there's a lot of families who we see someone experiences anxiety and depression, and it just makes the next generation a little bit susceptible to that as well. But I think with that comes the power to know that you can actually support them as well. If you experience anxiety, depression as a caregiver, you're in a unique position because you know that there is support out there and you can access that, and then you can provide that to your children as well.
How many times do you find a parent comes in and hears about their child's diagnosis and then looks at themselves and realises that there may be a few factors that they also experience?
Quite often. When I have assessments at work, often the school has said to this parent, your child has a few differences, we think you should go seek an assessment. They might suggest an autism assessment or an ADHD assessment. And throughout the process of gathering information and interviewing, I usually have a pretty targeted line of questioning when we're walking into these assessments. And as we go through the process of gathering this information, parents also say, oh, that's me. That was me when I was in school, but I didn't know it. And so they've actually spent their life developing their own kind of strategies that help them manage. And a lot of people are very adaptive and able to do that. But it's very interesting because I do see a lot of parents say, yes, this is exactly me when I was in school, and I just did whatever I could to cope. And so they often bring their children in, and we actually are able to diagnose and put in support for them that can help them thrive at school and, do better.
There's been a bit of a criticism lately in society that everyone seems to be diagnosed with autism and ADHD these days. What are your thoughts on that kind of rhetoric?
That's a big one. I think we have better tools these days. The research has grown exponentially. And so previously, we had a lot of naughty kids at school. The challenging one in the class, the one who always had to kick up a fuss about something. And that's actually not the case a lot of the time. A lot of these people were experiencing an undiagnosed condition that we just didn't know enough information about to identify. So we do have a lot better tools to identify these conditions today and to support them. So I would say we're probably not over-diagnosing. I think we're just more accurately diagnosing and finding these things now.
And if someone thought that they had a mental health condition, how do they actually go about accessing services? Or if someone were to come and see you, how would they do that?
There's a lot of different avenues you can use to access mental health support. There's a lot of public resources in hospitals. There's also a lot of not-for-profit organisations that do provide free mental health support. There's support services like Beyond Blue, Kids Helpline, Q Life, Brisbane Minds Matter. There's the Men's Line and the Black Dog Institute. So all of these are not-for-profit organisations that can provide you with resources and support. A lot of these places do have, wait lists as well, and sometimes it can be the best idea to just kind of contact everyone if you are looking for support, and then take the first opportunity that comes forward for support. There are other private avenues as well that you can access support. I work in the private industry myself. To access mental health support through the private industry, you can talk to your GP, and a GP can help you create a mental health care plan that allows you to access 10 subsidised psychology sessions in 1 year. And you can see this through to, it was from 1 year from the beginning, 10 sessions from there. If you also have other presentations, you can access a chronic disease management plan. If you're experiencing adversity at work or challenges at work as an adult, you can use the employee assistance program to access resources. And a lot of people who have disabilities, both physical and mental disabilities, can access the NDIS for support as well to fund intervention for them.
How has your experience been going through with the NDIS?
A lot of my clients are actually supported by NDIS. When we do our assessments, I will recommend that people be funded by NDIS. A lot of them have fortnightly psychology, occupational therapy, speech therapy, and other allied health supports. And that's a very expensive sort of intervention. So the NDIS has been able to subsidise a lot of those costs for these people to make sure they can obtain the support they need and, again, create the life that they want to live.
And what can we as a community do to try and support someone through mental health conditions?
I think a lot of the time when someone around us is experiencing a really challenging situation or is in distress, we can be tempted to kind of go in and fix everything. Let me just fix it all for you. I don't want you to feel like this. But sometimes the best thing we can do is just listen. A lot of people actually have the tools they need to create change in their life, but sometimes they don't have someone to listen to them. And so that would be my advice, is to create a space, listen to them without judgment, and just help them kind of figure out how they're feeling before you jump in, because they can probably fix themselves a lot.
And in a world where we're facing so much, if you look at the news, we're seeing war and we've had the pandemic recently, what can we do to help build resilience and trust in our kids so that they can feel really supported in a time that's very difficult to navigate?
I think as caregivers, the best thing we can do is we can create a safe space for our children. Go out and explore the world, but know that you're always welcome to come back, and you've got a safe space here to figure out what's going on and then go back out and try more. With children, I think it's just about giving them the chance to experience things and build resilience. Without, experiencing the world, you can't actually build any resilience. And sometimes it does mean give them a chance to go out, make a mistake. That's okay. Come back to your caregivers. They're the ones who provide that safe network for you to begin.
Thank you, Lachlan, for sharing your thoughts. I definitely want to understand how the audience feels and ask any questions. So I'll hand over to Anne, who will take the microphone. If you have a question yourself, if you could just pop your hand up and Anne will come to you and speak clearly into the microphone.
I've got the microphone.
Lachlan, thank you very much. It's been a wonderful presentation so far. I was interested in two questions that Louisa asked you. On the one hand, you spoke about the child with the phobia and trying to get into a lift, a very fixed situation, one that you could overcome step by step. But you also spoke about bullying at school. So in a sense, you have a child perhaps with school refusal trying to take steps to go back into an environment which is not fixed. So what are the differences then in your approach with that sort of problem? Because school refusal and bullying is almost epidemic at the moment.
Yes, that's a very common problem that we see with school refusal, is children are being bullied at school. Sometimes this doesn't actually become aware to anyone until they are seeing a psychologist. They might be refusing school and the school might think that they're having learning difficulties, or they might suspect something else is going on, but they aren't aware of bullying. And so often this will be divulged in a session to me that there is bullying happening at school. In this instance, we would be ensuring that the school is making the adequate steps to rectify this at school. We want to send the child back to a school where they feel safe and they can be supported. And so we'll address this with the school as well before we, begin anything else.
Lachlan had a client who was, as we're in a Christian environment here, and a runaway mental health homeless girl because she was an Ascot girl, and I'm gay, mum and dad, and I'm a Christian, and so her youth pastor told her to cut her gayness out of her body. It was a sin, so she then cut her gayness out of her body, and I saw her then as a homeless client, and in this environment addressed that sort of behaviour.
Are you referring to the self-harm?
No, she was one of my clients.
Oh.
No, but this is a really important question. So sometimes churches have made mental health disorders, or have actually created a mental health disorder where it didn't exist. So what is it, I guess I would have a follow-on question, but what is it that the community can do to help keep kids safe from that sort of harm? Is that the question? Have I heard that right?
The youth pastor has said no, being gay is a sin, and so she's then taken that on board and cut her gayness out of her body, and she suicided as a support plan.
So she has already suicided. What is it that we could have done?
Yeah, that's what, as a church organisation, then those things aren't discussed quite openly in this environment, so this is the opportunity.
Oh, that's a great question. So Lachlan, I really would love to hear your comment on it, and also would you be happy for me to then follow on as well? So did you want me to start, Lachlan?
Yeah, you can start. That's
yeah, it is. Sorry, come forward. I don't mean to steal the place, but these are the courageous conversations we need to have. Okay, so it is wildly inappropriate to tell anyone that they are not loved by God. It is wildly inappropriate, and nowhere in Scripture would it be ever said that a child should harm themselves because of who they are and what they bring. And so I actually would hope our communities, our church communities, would look more like Jesus, because Jesus just wouldn't do that. And that child has been significantly harmed. We've also seen in the media a child who was prevented from having the right medications for her diabetes because of religious beliefs. So and I guess the question is this. So you have here a community where we have these conversations and we talk about it, and a good number of our community are gay, genderqueer, we have some diversity in these spaces, and people feel solid, I hope. I hope they feel loved. And I would say there have been times in this place where it has not been so safe for people as well. I guess what is it that when you tell a child that God does not love them, that there is something profoundly wrong with them, is the answer that actually the voice that's saying the exact opposite needs to be louder? And so, Lachlan, maybe my question to you, I guess, so I've talked around this because it's a big topic. My question to you, would it have been helpful, potentially, if you had a client who was experiencing harm from a youth pastor in that way, to be able to say, I want you to know that there is this priest ordained in the Anglican Church, affirmed, who is saying this. And there are other people out there who will love you and take you under their wing and can show you your spirituality in a different way.
I think, similar to a point I said before, someone like this needs a listening ear.
Yeah.
They're in a situation where they're experiencing a lot of distress, and so they need someone who can be there to listen, not to judge, not to say anything else. They just need someone to be there. And so I would encourage communities like this to provide them with a space to be listened to.
Okay, and here is one of those things, what can we do to assist with mental health? Well, maybe what it is that we open up a space. Because one of the things is pastoral care. I'm not a psychologist, but I tell you what, my room, I listen. That's my job. And Lachlan's right. People have the answers. They work it out. They just need the space for someone to say, what is it that you really want? What is it that you hope will happen next? What are you bringing with you to this situation? And what can I do to equip you?
I think they also need someone to say, you shouldn't be experiencing this. People shouldn't say that to you, and that's okay to stand up for yourself.
Isn't that amazing? How many of us, we can walk out of here and it is okay to say, and how powerful to hear an adult, and particularly someone in authority, say, that is not okay. You are perfectly made. You should not be experiencing that. I will get you help. What is it that you need?
Yeah, 100%.
Our nearly 15-year-old grandson is on the spectrum, and he is fortunately in full-time school, but our problem with him is screens. It's a huge problem, and also with his younger brother, who's 3 years younger. We have them to stay, and we try to do good things, but they are addicted to being on screens and playing games, and it just bugs us, to a point where, look, we're still very happy to have them. It's just so difficult to do things and to, because all they want to do, the minute they get the chance, they're back into the room and they're on the iPad or they're on their phone, and it just goes on and on. So screens have been diabolically disastrous. And, you said parents don't get it. Think about grandparents, I mean, I'll take that comment home to my daughter. The parents don't get it, but, grandparents struggling even more.
What is it that we can be doing?
Yeah, this is a common one. A lot of children and teens are addicted to
Not
their
these
screen.
guys, though. These guys are... You don't like screens at all, do you? No.
I think, did you say that they were on the spectrum as well? Yeah. Yeah, a lot of these children have very specific areas of interest as well. And so a lot of their screen time can be in these really specific areas of interest. I would also encourage them to broaden their areas of interest. What other things interest you? What other things interest you outside of the screen? You might be interested in something particularly that can be accessed through the screen, but how can we bring this into, the real world as well? If you're really interested in, I have one child, he's really, really, really interested in presidents. He just learns everything he can about them, and he watches a million videos about presidents and history, and he spends all of his time on his screen. And his parents were having a really hard time managing this, and so we thought, well, let's use this special interest to our advantage. Let's get him going into a library to look at these things and access these interests in new ways outside of the screen. So encouraging them to broaden their interests bit by bit.
And so what I'm hearing is then that potentially what we can be doing is actually exploring what that interest is. What is it about? What are you doing on that iPad? What is it that's interesting? And then potentially taking the next leap. Oh, so you're watching videos about making paper planes, or the skibbity toilet thing just blows my brain. I think I can't really help you with that. Although, so you are interested in animation things. What is it we can do with that? Maybe there's something we can, building on that, being curious, showing interest in where they are. Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely, yes. When parents feel like they can't connect with their child because they're stuck in a screen, I encourage them to show some curiosity about what's on the screen. But
maybe you're just going to have to get interested in roadblocks. I know. Yeah, and it is hard. Wonderful. That is such a good question. I'm going to cruise through because I may have some written questions down. Do I have any written questions from here? No? There is a game we play on youth camp called Puzzle the Panel. I'm hoping they don't do that to you. All right, so here we go. Oh, what subject should you study at the high school if you would like to be a psychologist?
That's a good question. I think there's a broad range of subjects you can do. I think it would be useful if you took a bit of biology at school to understand a little bit about the human brain, a little bit of chemistry. They're not necessary though. You can study psychology and not do those subjects, but I found that was very useful. Mathematics is another one that I would probably recommend if you're going to study psychology at university, because believe it or not, they throw lots of statistics at you when you learn psychology, and I wasn't not aware of that, so I would say do that.
How do you heal from guilt and shame and sadness from something you've done?
That's a good question. Guilt and shame are different emotions. Guilt is I am bad, or guilt is I have done bad, sorry. Shame is I am bad. And not a lot of people understand the difference between those two. A lot of the time these emotions are born from certain experiences. And when I work with people who experience shame, I sort of get them to understand that most of the time, I'm not a bad person. I might have done something bad, but I am not a bad person. And so I'll often teach people to sort of get some space from these thoughts. Just observe their thoughts sometimes. I'm noticing that I'm feeling guilty about this. I'm noticing I'm feeling bad because I've done something. Even just getting a bit of space from your thoughts and just observing them as they show up can help you sort of diffuse them a little bit. You're not so stuck together and they don't just define you. I'm not bad. I've just done something bad. But I think if you are experiencing guilt and shame, consult a psychologist. Talk to someone who can help you and really understand where this comes from. It can be born from a range of different things, and so I think speaking to a professional about that's really useful.
Yeah, it's not the sort of thing we can work through in our own heads, is it? And so, yeah, that's brilliant advice. Thank you very much. And what else we got? How do I deal with fear for my future? And obviously our teenagers are facing a future that's very different from anything we encountered. How do I manage my fear for my future?
That's a big one. I think as a teenager, there's so much pressure to know what you want to do and how you're going to achieve it. And I think I'm a testament to you don't need to know what you're going to do at the age of 17. I didn't realise I was going to be a psychologist until partway through the actual psychology degree. I was studying it, but I still didn't know if I was going to be a practicing psychologist. I didn't know if I was going to work in researching. I didn't know if I was going to work in some other space. I think that it's natural to not know or be confident in what you're going to do yet as a teenager. The world is your oyster, literally. You can learn, you can change your career at 30, 40, 50 if you want to. There's no pressure to know everything today. As long as you're doing the things that you are feeling fulfilled by and that interest you, that's the main thing.
And I loved when you were talking about helping people find their compass. Where is it that you're actually pointing? And just do something towards that, and you're going to end up in that right place.
Exactly.
How are we going to help our kids thrive and adapt, that you can adapt? And actually you said too, find someone who'll listen, didn't you? The most important thing, it doesn't have to be your parents. And actually one of the things that I hope we can offer is a whole bunch of adults that have got time. Sometimes our older generation don't understand how much of a gift that is. Thank you. Have we got other questions from the floor?
Thank you very much for your talk. It's very interesting and informative. Could you discuss how you manage an adolescent or even a younger child who's presenting with a condition that really has its origin in the relationship that the child has with one or both parents?
This is a big one, actually. A lot of presenting concerns, a lot of things are actually mistaken for other things when really it's an attachment, concern with a parent. This is a really challenging one because a lot of parents are raised a certain way to do things a certain way, and their kids are very different to what they've ever expected they would encounter as a parent. I think there's a lot of parenting resources out there that you can access that are really useful. I'd recommend things like the Triple P parenting program is a lovely one to access. The Circle of Security parenting program is really lovely. I think creating a space for them to talk to you is really useful, and feeling like they can discuss what's going on in their life.
Thanks, Justin.
Oh, thank you very much for having you here and also to learn more about it. My question is similar to Sondergeld concerning the school. A lot of teenagers is really suffering in terms of bullying and other things that are crossing them. I witnessed more than 4 to 5 to more than that in my community. That's even 2 of them, they quit, they never go back to school. And that's a very big challenges to our community, to other communities, especially not only Australian alone, but non-Australian communities that came to join Australian. How do you reach out with this information to other communities to know about it? Because also it's a good way to educate and also to embrace the other people that they don't know anything about it. How do you reach your information out?
Is the question, how do we actually get the help and the advice and the supports that Lachlan is talking about and bring them into those places where your community could really do, if we'd stood shoulder to shoulder with some of those youths and helped them and made the environment right for them, maybe they would have stayed in school. Is that your question, or is it more about what can we do with...
For me, it's clear, because if you don't know anything, you need to
Yep.
know exactly better.
Mm-hmm.
How do other people know better to get there?
Oh, so how do we get other people to understand that there's a problem and these kids are being bullied 4 to 5 times as often in your community potentially? How do we get the message out to the broader community? And actually, this is a question I'm interested in. How, in our world as it is, do we build some bubbles for our kids where a child can say, it's tough here right now, but I can be supported and safe in schooling here? You know, have you seen some success stories, or do you have some thoughts from the clients you've seen?
I have seen a lot of clients who are experiencing bullying. Again, like I said before, parents aren't always aware that bullying is happening until they come to a session and we talk about that. I think a big part of it is getting involved with the school. So people like me often do reach out to schools and express that there is something happening. Sometimes it takes someone to speak up for someone who is experiencing this. Sometimes you need someone else to speak up for you if you are feeling like that. And so having a space for them to talk to someone can really facilitate that. Anyone who sees it should say something as well. That's really important. A lot of people, see it but may not say something for fear of something else happening, but we have to address these conversations head on and say that's not right. You need to address this, especially in the school environment.
That's really strong, isn't it? And we need to equip our kids potentially to name it too. That's not right. That's not right. I'm going to tell. Not you don't have to tell the other kids you're going to tell, but in yourself, you can name it and you can go and get help. Yep. And as adults, we need to know the same thing, isn't it? And just to know, we've got politeness, haven't we? We kind of stop, but can we have that's not okay. What happened to you then is not okay.
A lot of the kids I work with sometimes don't even recognise that they're being bullied. And it takes someone like me to say, that's bullying. You should not experience that. And we need to change this.
Yep.
The education world as well. And just seeing, having a glimpse into different schools, just how, some of the young people that we anticipate would actually be able to advocate for themselves need a lot of support to do that. So to talk up and who to talk to. Sometimes it's literally the really specific information around, that chaplain or that social worker or that teacher, even if it's a teacher that might teach them once a week. If there's a little bit of rapport and some connection, there's so much evidence around that rapport. And if there's an itsy bit of connection with one person, that's their avenue. And obviously for some of our neurodiverse young people, doing that in a way that they feel comfortable, it might even be signaling, or a thumbs signal, or a, hey, I need a check-in, please, at, a given time. But our young people often don't know where to start with actually speaking out. And just as you were saying, Lachlan, I thank you so much. I've really enjoyed hearing from you. But just as you mentioned earlier, also about that very, a lot of our young people might not read between the lines necessarily, or we need to be quite direct with our language sometimes, because saying things like, we need to cut it out of you, that could be really misconstrued with our language. So being clear with our language.
Lachlan, thank you so much for tonight, and I'm really chuffed to see that this is recorded, so sorry for being late. Question to both you, Lachlan, and also Anne. Do you have, or do you encourage mental health first aid? So I know we've got a physical first aid, and I just came across mental health first aid a couple of years ago and just did the refresher this week. They've got an acronym and things around that, so just curious around that in your practice and here in the church.
I have my mental health first aid.
Yeah, it's a growing sort of area. I didn't actually realise this was something until a couple of years ago, but a lot of workplaces are now putting in place mental health first aid person. So there's just training. Yeah. So what was the question? Sorry.
Would you advocate for you, or do you think that's a helpful thing?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, especially in the workplace as well. I know this is about sort of child and youth mental health, but in the workplace there can be a lot of conflict and situations that can be challenging to manage. And I think having a mental health first aid person that talk that through is a good starting point before reaching out for further support. So absolutely, I would advocate for that.
Yeah, and I'm happy if anyone's interested. I will talk to you about it. It was great.
I know for the physical first aid it's ABC, but for those that are not aware of the mental health steps, it's ALGEE, ALGEE, so first to approach and assist. And what I loved hearing before about that, listen non-judgmentally, is that second bit. And then G is the giving information and resources. And then the E is encouraging professional support, and then encouraging other support. So for me, I just found that so helpful coming across that, and not to your point of not having to fix, and just, yeah.
A lot of people have the resources and the tools they need to fix the problems in their life. They just need someone to say, you shouldn't be experiencing that. It's okay to feel upset about this. Someone to give them that space to just sit with that feeling for a little while before they actually go out and fix it.
Yeah, that's right. It's really cool, and actually you can have the conversation without having to fix it. If you have the conversation, it doesn't make you responsible for the problem. I think sometimes that's the scary bit. I actually saw your practice is a neurodiversity affirming practice. Isn't that a current thing at the moment? May I ask a question about how you experience that and what that is for you in your practice?
This is it's a sort of a very political sort of discussion in the world of psychology, I guess. But what I see at the moment is when people are diagnosed with autism or ADHD, it's technically classified as a disability, but sometimes the language we use around that isn't very helpful, isn't very useful. It's deficit focused, it's weakness focused. When people with these presentations actually have a lot of skills, a lot of resources, they're often very intelligent as well. So to be defined by what someone might consider as a weakness or a deficit can be very, challenging for someone, and it can take a toll on their mental health. So the neuroaffirming sort of movement is about recognising that these people have skills and are intelligent. They're just a little bit different.
Yeah, so it's about a difference as opposed to, that's really cool. It's a really helpful way to understand it, isn't it? And then that allows us to help people. And the word you used was thrive. How good was that? What we all want is our young people to thrive.
In my work as a GP, I had a patient who'd been diagnosed with ADHD, and she wasn't able to continue formal schooling. And I asked her, well, what is your aspiration for the future? And she said, I'd love to be a nurse, but because of my ADHD, I don't think I'd be very good at it. And I said to her, have you ever walked into an emergency department? every clinician in the emergency department definitely has features that are similar to that of ADHD. Their amazing ability to have 10 patients under their care, focus on this one, know this one needs me, split that focus, go to this one, oh, this one, and be able to just juggle that. Whereas I love GP and I love focusing on one patient at a time, sorting them out in the time I have, and then moving on to the next one. And so it's been a story that I've told a lot of my patients with ADHD afterwards about her case, and her realising that there is an amazing career ahead of her in nursing if she wishes to choose it, and maybe the ED might be the place for her.
Yeah, and isn't that wonderful to see the lived experience and the success? Yeah.
Yeah, I've actually worked with a lot of psychologists who've been diagnosed with ADHD and things as well. So that even with that, you can still achieve your dreams. It doesn't define you to just have that.
Sometimes it's because of that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Lachlan, I was intrigued. You've spoken about the principles of care, to be able to listen to people, give them a safe space. We've had a couple of examples tonight, though, in terms of people being made to feel worthless because of sexual diversity. And Jeff's question too about what about with parents, and it's difficult for some kids if the problem is just as much the parent. So that's fine, understand the principles. You're going to provide them with a safe space, you're going to listen. But then what do you do? How do you move on with all of this?
It's a challenging thing when you have a child in therapy and a parent is sort of on the other side of the viewpoint. It's very hard. I think if they're willing to be open to just the conversation about it, it's a starting point. I think they just need to hear what their child's experience is sometimes before they rush in with any sort of advice, or if they want to express an opinion, sometimes they just need to kind of hear what their child's experience is first.
So again, that really encouraging listening and allowing parents to do that work of listening, which was not how my generation was raised. So it's different for us. We're having to learn some skills we didn't necessarily see. Yeah, and it does come to that. And then having a space where you're affirmed, valued, is the best thing I'm hearing then. If home is not safe, you need somewhere else where someone sees you, knows you by name, and listens to you.
It's a very protective thing to have if you feel like there's, the space that you live in isn't that safe and you don't feel very good there. At least to have another space where you do feel like you are valued and protected and understood. That can be a really protective thing for children and youth who are experiencing mental health challenges, is to have somewhere and someone who will listen.
And so practically, that's something we can all provide.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Lachlan. Good to hear from talking. My background's engineering, but not everything's always black and white. Not with me anyway. But sometimes it is. You talked about guilt and shame before, and bad and good. The question I've got to ask you really is, how do they learn bad? How do they learn good? Where do they get it from? I mean, it's got to come from somewhere. It's no good fixing the problem later on if they haven't got the degree of goodness in them to start with. And they've got to be taught that somewhere, or learned that from some exercise. Could you perhaps look back a little bit and say how that could be dealt with?
So was your question that where does it come from?
Yeah, how do kids form? Yep, and how do they develop that moral compass? Is that the question? Yep.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it can be the environment, sometimes it can be the social media that they access, sometimes it can be the schooling environment, the bullying that they're experiencing can, facilitate a sense of shame. And sometimes it's for something that they can't change. So I think it's a tough question because, you don't know where it always comes from, but sometimes you can help them to understand, well, I do feel like this. Why? And what can I do to change that?
And is the question also, some kids get in trouble and end up in trouble with the law and end up in a position where they are struggling against and fighting against all the time. Where does that start versus a child who has their resilience and knows who they are and they're grounded and they make choices that are kind and, what we would call, in inverted commas, good? The child that actually is confident and able to do things that actually take care of other people and keep themselves whole and safe. Yeah, where does that start?
That's a big
Great
one.
question.
Yeah.
I'm throwing that one to Lachlan. Well, I think we might have to have Lachlan back, don't you?
Yeah. Honestly, that's a very challenging one. It's very hard to sort of pinpoint where some of these things come from.
Yeah.
It's really, really challenging. Some people I've worked with for years and they still don't know why that certain things make them feel a certain way. You know, a lot of mental health things are a mystery to some people. But I think as long as we can figure out how we can manage it so that it doesn't cause an impact on your life, if you are experiencing shame and guilt, if you don't know where it comes from, let's figure out how we can change it still, you know?
Yep. And for the child who is actually starting out on the wrong track, how then do we love them into a place where actually they're making choices that keeps them safe and others around them safe?
Lachlan, do you have many children, both sexes, and ranging in age from quite young, or often with quite young, who have real anger issues, who really rage and often don't know why, but they've got something to rage against and, you know, they go off?
Yes, I have worked with quite a lot of children over the time that I've been a psychologist who have differences in their ability to regulate their anger, we might say. Yeah. In some of my psychology sessions, I've heard a lot of four-letter words, which, you know, have been, from children who just don't know how to regulate their emotions. Yeah. So yes, I've worked with a lot of them over the course of my career. A lot of them, like I said before, children need it to be broken down simpler. Yeah. How does that emotion feel? I'll teach children just to identify the emotion. We'll draw a little map of it out, figure out what's going on. You know, they might notice certain changes in their body when they are feeling angry. I'll teach them that first. I'll teach them how to recognize how angry they are. I'll teach them, a big part of, you know, anger intervention is teaching them that it's okay to feel angry. Anger is actually, you know, a useful emotion sometimes, not all the time. But it's about, how do I manage this? Am I using this to make things better or worse? So children, they just need it broken down a little bit more, you know, teach them more about it. Name the beast, learn about it, to tame it.
Yeah, isn't that cool? And I think the thing I'm loving, I'm hearing over and over, and I just want to point it out, that actually we can have these really big uncomfortable feelings. And the hope is actually we can look at them, manage them, they're not going to be, we don't have to be defined by them, and there's stuff we can do. How much hope is there if a young person knows actually those big horrible feelings you got, guess what? There's actually things you can do to bring them down a little.
Every emotion serves a purpose. Just sometimes, you know, we just need to recognise, is it the one that's right for this moment? Yeah. So yeah, a lot of kids don't recognise that it's okay to feel angry. It's just not okay to do certain things when they are angry. Finding more adaptive ways to manage it. But yes, I work with a lot of children who are on the spectrum, who experience, you know, anger and meltdowns that can last for hours, you know, and that can be really challenging and draining for parents to manage as well. But yeah, giving them some of these tools to understand it a little bit more helps them get better at recognising it and improving on it.
And what I'm hearing there is that we don't build shame then. There's nothing wrong with a kid. We've got this thing we're dealing with.
Yeah. It's okay to feel like this. Let's just find a better way to manage it.
Oh, what do you teach the parents?
Yeah. When I have kids who come in and there's a lot of emotion regulation challenges, there's a few different parenting resources I like to recommend. A book I really love to recommend to parents is called It's a Jungle, and it talks about children can be a little bit like a wild animal, and they're tempting you to kind of come into the jungle and have a bit of a jungle battle with them. Meet them on their level and get as big and scary as they are, and whoever's biggest and loudest will win. And that might work, but at what cost? So that book is really great at helping parents to identify, well, all right, the kid's in the jungle now. I'm not going to go into the jungle. I'm going to stay out here, and I'm going to, you know, find a way to calm down, regulate myself, so that I can provide this child with the safe space they need to work through this emotion. So yeah, that's a great book I would recommend. It's a Jungle.
And isn't that cool that you actually don't have to enter into it, right? You can stay where you are, and it is draining and it's tough, but actually that can just stay there and work away.
It's also okay if you do go into the jungle sometimes. Every parent has their day where they go, this is too much, and they just lose it as well. You know, every parent is going to have those days, and that's okay as well. And also by doing that, you can also model to children, I did feel like that, I did do the wrong thing. I'll do better next time, it's okay.
So modelling how you come back from
Exactly.
it. Isn't that's really, it's something in our society we don't do very well. How do we come back from it? How do we bring people back into relationship? Yeah. This has been such a cool conversation. How are we going, people? Have we targeted all our questions? We're going to have some supper afterwards and an opportunity to chat and snack. But yeah, I think we've covered the floor. Thank you, Louisa.
So thank you very much for joining us tonight and being part of our first Courageous Conversation. I'd like to thank Lachlan for his thoughtful commentary today and sharing a lot of his skills. Over supper tonight, Lachlan will be around as well, so if you wanted to ask him any questions or something that you didn't feel comfortable sharing so publicly, you're more than welcome to continue the conversation.
Say hello, I'm friendly.
And I would also like to invite you to join us on Sunday the 8th of September at 5:30 p.m. for our next Courageous Conversation. It's on domestic violence and family law with Dr. Samantha Jeffries. She is a criminology researcher and lecturer. And I'd also like to welcome anyone, if you'd like to assist with the ongoing Courageous Conversations, please let us know. We'd be happy to welcome you on our team. So if we could take the opportunity to thank Lachlan, our speaker. And thank you to Anne for supporting this event as well and all the work you did to set it up.
And Louisa, beautiful job. Thank you, Louisa, who has been the mastermind. And we did ring Lachlan in. He's not a member of the church. He's a friend of Louisa's, and so he has graciously given his time because these conversations are important. So Lachlan, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Let's go and have some supper.